Well, thank you for attending this. This Lunch and Learn is on infographics. Also like to call it Data is Beautiful. And it's about ways to communicate information through graphics. So what is an infographic? It's a way to communicate complex information in easy to understand and digestible segments. One thing that I always like to say is that it's leveraging the principle of a picture is worth 1,000 words. And it's really true. And by constructing the picture to provide all the layers that we want to communicate, it becomes a very powerful tool. And it can be very simple. Here's one of the first ones that is ever really officially recognized as a real infographic was John Snow's cholera map of London in 1854. And there was a cholera outbreak in cramped Soho neighborhood, and they couldn't understand or figure out what the root cause was. And they were thinking it was caused by bad air, and they were looking at air transmission and all kinds of other things, contact transmission. And it wasn't until John Snow, a physician, became convinced that there was something else other than this theory of air. And by creating this map and tracking where people went, and you can see in the darker colors the density of the cholera, he was able to figure out that it matched the pattern of use of a water pump. And so everybody who used that same water pump was getting cholera. So through this infographic and translating the data to this graphic, they were able to do a better job root causing and to also communicate it and share it with people so they understood and believed this theory when there had been other theories like air that had shown to be false, and allow quick action. So I thought that's kind of a neat way that, to show how it was not just used for communicating, but as a tool for solving a problem. So what's a good infographic? A good infographic introduces and concludes a concept, and concludes an important phrase there because there's a message we're trying to get through. So John Snow's originally was about finding the solution, but then after, it was a great tool as well for communicating what was extremely evident once it was shown in that form. It helps the audience build links, and it invites discovery, and it really should create a sequence of epiphanies as people observe it and they realize, oh, I understand. And then there's another level of depth. Oh, I understand, further. So what's a bad infographic? It's 99% of whatever you can auto-generate with a software package. These are all the word auto-generate is what kills it because it's being constructed per a template that's adaptable to a lot of things, not to creating a specific message. So it's very unlikely you're going to find a generic tool or something you get from Excel or PowerPoint that's really going to create a powerful infographic. It might have elements that you incorporate and use as tools to create it, and I do that a lot, but you're never going to just create a chart from there and have it be a good infographic. This is an infographic I created once, and it frankly stinks. You can see an attempt here to try to, communicate a concept. And really in doing so, it made sense to me what I was doing here, but I really found in getting response from the audience, I used this at a conference, and in talking with them, I could see it didn't have the effect I thought. So there's a little bit of an interesting lesson learned there about pulling on people as you're creating it, showing to them and getting feedback. And I'm actually going to do that a little bit here. I'll show you some current ones. I have one that I'm very actively working on, and I'll be interested in after this presentation and having you, reach out to me and communicate and hearing what you think and see how I can improve it. But in this one, I was trying to communicate the concept of the connection between test output and other elements in the program. So I was trying to represent that there was data that then drives information, that then if you plug it into the customer programming team, things happen. But other than that statement, this doesn't really share anything and kind of becomes more of a graphic or an icon. So I would say that this was not a good one. In my opinion, the worst way to represent data is a pie chart. You will never, ever see me even represent simple data in a pie chart. It doesn't yield value in my opinion. Even this example where somebody created this infographic, and what they did is they plotted when their 6-year-old said, "Do you want to know something?" And he actually wrote something because that's the way they pronounced it, and wrote down the categories of what they offered. And clearly, when you glance at this, you can see an interesting diversity of things that their 6-year-old was thinking about. But really, I mean, what does this chart do for you? You glance at it and you're like, okay, they clearly are very interested in Minecraft and Paper Mario and I guess Garfield. And beyond that, this is just taking up a lot of space. Then next in line is the Pareto chart. Now, I think Pareto charts are good. They're not really an infographic. In my opinion, they don't satisfy that helping people draw a strong conclusion or giving them layers of information or epiphanies. It's kind of a better version of the pie chart, right? But really, people all the time include their whole data set in a Pareto, and that's not really what it's about. It's about drawing attention to the most critical factors. So why not just show the 2 most critical factors and some other layers of information that are going to drive the discussion you want to have? Because the Pareto is only about directing attention to something. That's not the discussion. An infographic should support a discussion. So try and think of it in those terms after you create it, because it's easy, as you saw in my example earlier, where I created one that I thought was directing discussion, but it just was making a singular point and really wouldn't support any real conversation. Here's one that came about because I found that I kept having the same conversation in communicating a concept to people. When introducing the idea of reliability testing and how it's different than other testing, one of the explanations is that reliability testing measures and improves product reliability. And I always thought it was very interesting then to talk about specific tests and describe which they were or what of the ratio of combination they were. Because really all of them have to some degree some ratio of combination of objective, of improve, or measure. So by creating this simple bar with a transition in color from orange to blue, the apex ridge colors, just totally coincidence, I dropped different tests on here. And so you can see that halt testing is really almost entirely providing value by improving reliability. It does not offer a lot of output on measuring reliability. And that's a very intentional compromise. The idea with halt testing is to yield information about failures for design input for robustness improvement. I call it blind robustness improvement because you don't know how much you're improving it, but you are surely improving it. But to do that, you have to have the stresses in the test be disassociated from regular use cases. That's how you're able to generate the information so quickly. So you're giving up the opportunity to measure. Now, accelerated life testing, which unfortunately is a similar acronym to HALT, considering how opposite they are, accelerated life testing is very much about measuring wear out, measuring the end of use life. It doesn't provide a lot of input about how to improve the design. Understanding the failure mode and stress to failure mode relationship is an input to accelerated life testing. You have to already have characterized that and proved that this stress, drives a consistent degradation leading to this failure mode. So all it simply does is provide output that can be used to measure when this occurs in the distribution around it. And then there's tests like reliability growth, which actually have in the description for it measure and improve reliability, where it's looking to do both simultaneously, where it's looking to create metrics that are designed to help connect to the program, as well as root cause analysis methods. So I created this and it really helped with that conversation, and it's simple, and it goes to show an infographic can be very simple. But then it got even more powerful when I put it over with the bathtub curve, which is another common graphic used for communicating basic reliability principles. And in putting them together, it created an entirely different level, multiple level, set of information to support very diverse conversations. I can put up this single graphic and it can support a half-hour conversation, or it can support a 5-minute description. And it ends up showing up without even intentionally into a lot of my presentations, just because so many principles can be supported by this. So to me, that's one of the characteristics of a good infographic. It has layers. It has the ability to support a 5-minute conversation. If it was on a poster in a wall and you walked by it, you get a piece of information and keep going. But it also has the ability to support a long conversation on a complex topic. So that's what I'm really impressed with an infographic. And this one will continue to evolve, I'm sure, over time, progressing to where it has a lot of layers and levels to support both short and long conversations. So speaking of simple, this is a 2x2 matrix. And don't underestimate how powerful. This is a deceptively simple but extremely powerful way to share information. And its simplicity is one of the things that makes it so powerful. And when I say powerful, this is how big the 2x2 matrix book is that I have. I purchased this book because I think 2x2 matrices are tremendous, but you can see that basically somebody has spent their entire thesis and life dedicated, multiple people, there's 2 authors for this, seeing the value for this book that's very popular. And that's how much information, and strategy can go into a good 2x2 matrix. So how does a 2x2 matrix work? And the other thing with it being simple is you can spontaneously bring it into a conversation very easily. You can, be talking about something with somebody and try to break it down this way on the whiteboard, on a piece of paper. And you can see in here that the 2 axes represent 2 different features or elements. And in this case, we're talking about, personality traits. And the x-axis there, the 2 ends are ask and tell. So what method of communication? And the vertical is mindset, closed and open. And then there's simply four labels or categories. And you can imagine if you were trying to analyze behaviors, this would be a great way to quickly parse out 4 individual identifiers that then would support further analysis. So again, very simple, but you can see how subtle differences in structuring this can have a big impact in getting to those 4 quadrants. So it's almost like a small puzzle. So here's one that I recently saw in the Harvard Business Review that I thought was great, and it was communicating 8 styles of company culture in a 2-axis chart. And you can see here the x-axis is independence to interdependence, and the vertical axis is stability to flexibility. And they didn't just put 4 quadrants in there. What they did was they allowed for there to be some differentiation, as if it was a graph, where even though there's an element that's in the interdependence and flexibility range, they plotted out 2 different locations in there for 2 versions of that, with one that's more influenced by flexibility and one that's more influenced by interdependence. So there's a lot, you can add their layers to the 2-axis chart as well. It doesn't have to be just that simple. So now I'm going to share with you one that I'm actively working on. And like I said, I'll be very interested in getting feedback on this. And anybody who's watching this as a video, please feel free to email me or reach out to me. I'd love to get your input. So this one is about effective product development based on the ratio between reliability process engagement, early or late in the product development process, that's the x-axis, and the y-axis has to do with how well the entire team shares all the product goals. So those of you who know me know I talk a lot about the product goal balance between cost, features, time to market, and reliability. And this is about the difference between if you have low team goal sharing, individuals take a single goal and align with it. So project managers typically would, in that case, with a low goal sharing, only align with time to market. R&D engineers would only align with product feature development. Reliability engineers would be holding the reliability flag alone. And then if it's high, what you get is you have the balance that was created when the strategy for maximum market share was originally developed by, the business unit and the technical unit. And the entire team holds that balance of goals as their goals. So project managers aren't going to just only drive by time to market. They're going to make compromises when the product development feature side needs more time, and that's getting out of balance. And the reliability team will compromise and allow, when the time to market's critical, allow the reliability to be compromised and not hit its goal exactly maybe at release, and see that there's value in getting it out there quickly and doing some continued testing as it's being released, or maybe decide to engage with a customer for customer trials. So that would be a team that's sharing the goals high. And then the early and late engagement is the reliability process and toolkit being fully used. If you have early engagement, that means that even in the concept stage, you're looking to the reliability design for reliability process tool set and incorporating it. If it's late, then that's that kind of unknowing strategy of let's make a product, and then at the end of the product development process, we'll test in the reliability. That kind of concept that somehow you can test it and it comes out better. And it's really too late to have a big impact. So with this 2x2 matrix, I wanted to create multiple levels of information. The first was simply a label to put on your type of product. And that's the colored one, and that's the major first level takeaway. If you are developing a product that has an early reliability process but low goal team sharing, you kind of have an also-ran product. It's not a failure, but you're not a market leader. You're somewhere in the middle, hoping to hold your market share without other people taking it away from you. If you have high goal sharing in the team, but you engage the reliability process late, you have stunted growth. You're not going to be able to grow your product, because you're going to be spending a lot of time, even though the whole team is taking all the goals seriously and collaboratively, you're not going to be able to improve your product because you're going to spend all your time fixing issues. And with the late engagement of reliability tools, what happens is you basically end up with these program phases, recovery phases that are after release. This whole idea that, we hit our schedule by releasing on time, but then spent a year and a half continuing to improve it in the field in this firefighting situation. Obviously, you're not growing your technology. You can't. All the resources consumed with firefighting. Then we have the worst case scenario, which I just called stodgy because it's a word that nobody wants to be associated with, which is obviously the goals, the team's all just in battle with each other for their own personal goals, and the reliability process was introduced late, and it's not good. There's no reason, you should know if you're there to try and get out of there. And then the best being the team goal sharing being high and engaging a reliability process early. And that's your eureka. That's where you're constantly having these bursts of advancement that are happening, where you find yourself shockingly grabbing more market share than you thought. With each new iteration of product, you're efficient. You're getting the products out earlier. There's no surprise recovery phases. And then I wanted to describe a little bit, beyond those labels. So you can see that's the first level, right? Where you can simply just take that away and go away. You can, only words you need on here are the words at the end of the axes and those 4 colored words. And you could have a pretty substantial conversation discussing your process and what it results in. But then if you choose to, use this for another level of depth, I have those other smaller words around them. And so for instance, with the eureka, what does that translate to? What are symptoms of it? Maximum profit. You're really going to be striving for maximum profit. You're going to be selling the intended product, the product you plan to design and build and sell. You're going to end up getting earlier and earlier to market because of this extremely efficient process. So you'll be implementing tools and methods that just dropped on the schedule as raw elements appear to extend your time to market. But once incorporated and part of the process, it's shown over and over again, you get earlier to market. And then, of course, high reliability is the result. So if that's important, that's there. And I thought it was good, too, to also put a quote that kind of describes this quadrant. And for Eureka, I said the product that was intended is the product that is created. Maximum market share, maximum profit. And by comparison, if you're in the stodgy, Your product devastates your bottom line. Survival is based on success of your legacy products, which is obviously leaving you tremendously vulnerable. So this is one I'm actively working on, and I think you can see the strategy I have here. I want it to be able to be something that I can introduce the concept of the relationship between early and late reliability process and team goal sharing to somebody who I've never spoken with before, and I know that they're only going to listen to me for 10 minutes, and then that's all I get. This will support that. Or this could be a graphic that gets pulled up in a weekly meeting every week, if this is a topic in the meeting, and continues to support the conversation, because we can even begin to change these words and customize it for their specific situation. So now let's look a little bit at some of the fun diversity that you can have. Creativity is a big thing here. It's kind of fun to pull out that element and see what else you can do to show data. So what is this? This is somebody who recorded the sleep pattern of their newborn baby every day for a year. So with that, you're going to look at it and start to kind of get a feel of this ratio that over a year what was happening. But then the question is, so you're assuming that the dark is sleep and the light is the orange is not. This one is totally coincidentally the Apex Ridge company colors. I didn't make this one. And so just from that, you can, being told what it is, you get some information, and you can see the shift, right? You can see the inner part, that there's a full 12-hour shift from sleeping in the day and sleeping at night. So for this, the two other elements then to get a level deeper is that this is actually on a clock. So the top is midnight, the bottom is noon. And so now you're seeing, and each rotation is a full day. So even though they are longer, they're not longer. They're just stacked on top of each other. So the 24-hour duration of the smallest inner circle is the same 24-hour duration of the largest outer circle. They're just stacked on top of each other. So this is really a cool visualization of the fact that, what's the first big takeaway? You're like, oh, after, this amount of period of time, they really flipped from sleeping during the day, having a general daytime sleeping pattern, to a nighttime sleeping pattern. And, obviously you can keep looking at it in further granularity, which is, very interesting. I actually want to pop over to show you too that you can also have motion, which can be very powerful as well. So you can see here, this is an active map of wind in the United States. And it's really neat. And the great thing about it too is that, there's so many modern softwares that are run on browsers that you can use them. So you can continue to zoom into different areas and, and see. I know a lot of the audience here is in Atlanta, so you can obviously see Atlanta if we want to look and see the wind right there. So this is one that's a relatively simple piece of code, but you can see how you can add motion to infographics too, to obviously dramatically change, what you can communicate. This is another one that I thought was neat, because in a single graphic, you can't include time. But this one, they wanted to share to give people the real understanding of the distance and space between planets by saying, okay, what if the Earth was 100 pixels wide on your screen? And then you click and it goes and it fast forwards to show you then the moon would be 3,000 pixels away. But they also are using time, the time it takes to transition, to give you a sense of it. And then they say, okay, Mars. Now, you've gotten a sense of moving from Earth to the moon. So here we are now all of a sudden getting a sense that, oh, the Mars isn't just another same duration of spacing. And they're actually going so long that they're taking time to have a conversation with you and further highlight the fact that it's a long time. You're traveling at 3 times the speed of light now for that long. And you're watching the dots, the stars fly by and another message come, and you're really getting the idea of the scale between traveling to the moon and traveling to Mars. And they even share a factual information. It takes us 150 days, to get there. So that's kind of neat too, that you can use, motion in there as well, and don't hesitate to do that. So with motion, here's one that I created a long time ago about dealing with the balance between the product goals of cost, features, reliability, service, and manufacturing. And I wanted to show in this circle that I'm communicating the idea that you have to compromise in a lot of cases. So the iPhone went for high reliability and high features, but it's at the expense of cost point. I mean, iPhones aren't cheap. And, they had to come away from service too for that to be the case. But by comparison, you would end up over here for an entry-level consumer drill. The idea is easy to manufacture and low cost point, but it might be at the compromise of high features and high reliability. So the motion doesn't have to be complex code. This is just motion I'm doing in PowerPoint to communicate simply the comparison of two extremes of the fact that you can't have everything. You have to decide, what is going to compromise other things that are of higher priority. This is another infographic I created to further take another level, deeper on that same principle. And I know anybody who knows me knows I love my analogies. So I was trying to communicate the idea that these different things that are competing also have different mechanisms of motion and translation. So I decided to use the idea of how we do household budgets to talk about the budget of resource for a program, not our financial budget, but our time and compromising different factors like time to market and maybe features and things like that. And what I want to share here is that graphically, each one of these lines represents a specific thing in your household budget, maybe food, entertainment, clothes, vacationing. And there's actually, we all do this instinctively if we know we have X amount of money and we need to, we want to balance between the different things. And it turns out that we want to do bigger vacations. So we see, well, maybe we can adjust our entertainment budget. But these things also don't all work in a linear gradient, right? You can with our food budget, there's really probably two phases of difficulty of compromising it and then a hard limit, right? So if we want to improve our vacations, you can probably cut into your food budget initially pretty easily. Like, all right, we'll cut out, we'll do more basic ingredient prep meals instead of buying pre-things. We won't eat out as much, things like that. And it's kind of easy to adjust and change and pull down, and that's that lighter pink color. But then you're going to get to some limit where it gets much harder to further pull out of the food budget, where it's like, all right, now we're kind of getting to where we're talking about volume of food or, other things, spending a lot of time doing prep to where it's cutting into our work schedules and it gets harder and harder. And then you're going to probably have a hard limit where you're like, wait a minute, we're actually starving people to go on a longer vacation. This doesn't make any sense. We can't bring it down lower than this because it affects health. Then you might have something like the vacation, which has a simple linear scale, but then a cancel threshold where you can, instead of having your vacation be 2 weeks, cut it down to 1 week. Then you might cut some of the activities you do. But when you get it and you cut it down to where it's just the cost of airfare, you just cancel it. That doesn't make any sense to fly somewhere, turn around and fly back. So it has a cancel threshold. Clothing might have a deferment where you could actually take it to zero and not buy new clothes that year, and you're effectively deferring to another year to buy new clothes. You just try and get more time out of it. And entertainment might be totally linear. So I created this infographic to communicate that they all kind of have different equations with regard to how we adjust them. And that they would adjust based on those equations. So that's this infographic. And it seemed to work pretty well because then I can easily translate it over to, now that I've created an understanding of it, the second one, which is actually for the elements that I wanted to share that idea on in developing a product. So the food one, cost point might be like the food one where, you get to a certain point where you can make some adjustments and maybe increase the cost of the product to add a little bit more features or improve reliability. And then it's going to get harder and harder to where you're pushing yourself out of your target market. And then there's a hard limit where it makes no sense to sell, in this case, a car with Honda Civic features for $80,000. That doesn't make any sense. And then the reliability might be more like the entertainment one where it's a completely linear thing. And features might be like the vacation one where there's a cancel threshold where you're like, you know what, guys? It makes no sense to sell a modern day cell phone without Bluetooth. Like, just cancel the project. That doesn't make sense if you're suggesting we can't include that. So graphics ended up being a really great way to communicate this. But this also, again, I'm using some kind of simple elements here. I've seen some really amazing infographics that are really about grabbing your attention. So if this was a poster and somebody told you it's an infographic, it's going to draw your attention for a while. It's a little bit of a puzzle. What are we seeing here? Well, in this case, what you're seeing is Tesla's stock, right? So it was thrown in here as a background, like a silhouette of the mountains. And then obviously once you hear that, you're like, yeah, that's not what mountains are going to look like. And you see the stock clearly. So what if you did this with an audience and then the next week at your, leadership meeting threw up another graphic like this and without explaining it? And they know the general topic, what department you're from and what you like to communicate on. And they're going to have some fun and you're going to get their attention for these people, maybe CEOs who give you 10 seconds per slide and say next. Now you have one that's holding attention and keeping them focused on the discussion. So including, photos and drawings and things like that can be a really neat way to do it. So I'm going to share with you now another one that I've created to communicate a concept. And this concept I wanted to share was the fact that we tend to assume that in an organization, information flows in some path that corresponds to the hierarchy of the organization. So you could take an org chart and say, well, that's the chain of command, so that's how information's reported. And, in doing my culture work, my reliability culture work, I did a lot of investigation about where information flows. I worked with customers. I was helping it, improve their organization for better product development practice, and I found that information flows like this. And then I found that there was a lot of elements with regard to how the information flows that was hard to communicate. So I actually created a notation. So you'll see here, obviously the lines show where information is going and where it skips and different paths to it, but you also see an interesting notation with the arrows. They're not just the way you would traditionally have arrows at the end of lines giving a single point of direction. Some of them have two arrows on them, some of them have arrows pointing in instead of out. So what I created here in this infographic was a notation that once you understand it, you can then look at that and instantly pull out a whole different level of information from it. So not only are those two nodes connected, the arrow notation here from this key helps you communicate two different factors of information. One is the idea of pushing information versus pulling information at the top there in blue. Pushing information is when you come home and your spouse asks you a question, did you do such and such today? That is, that's pulling information. Pushing information is coming home and telling your spouse about something you did that day. It wasn't requested. So you can see here in these notations, in the first one, B is pushing the engineering manager information on the CTO. That means the CTO didn't ask a question, and the engineering manager is telling them. So the end of the line that the arrow's on is where it was initiated, okay? So that means the next one, the CTO is asking for the information. So the arrow indicates what direction the information is flowing. The end of the line indicates how it was initiated. So in the first one, the engineering manager wants to tell the CTO something. In the second one, the CTO is asking for the information. And then you can see in these others, we'll go out to the last one here, where the CTO is actually both pushing and pulling. They are both asking for information, and they are also providing and telling information. So there's information they want to give to the engineering manager. And then if we look at the bottom, the red, decision and discussion, I wanted to also add the notation that is parallel to the pushing and pulling, but the idea of owning questions, owning discussion, and owning decisions. So this notation also represents that. So once you're familiar with this key and notation, now you could create those infographics and update them and very quickly share with people where information is going, which can yield some really interesting insights into what's happening in the organization and where there's bottlenecks. As you can see, if in the diagram I had, there's an you have lower level people communicating, and in one case, a reliability test engineer pushing information to the VP for critical decisions, jumping up a few levels, which was a big burden to the VP because they actually couldn't make the decisions without that information. And this very quickly showed something in our process has to change. This one is interesting. This one to me is about the idea of cause and effect, and also being cautious about pulling too much information, pulling too many assumptions from it. So this is cardiac related deaths in relation to Waffle House locations in America. And you can clearly see there is an extremely strong correlation with areas that have a Waffle House and heart attacks related deaths. So of course, if you could say, okay, well, Waffle House is causing heart attacks, but we know that that's not the case. In fact, here, what we've probably diagrammed is two elements that are results of a similar behavior. So in other words, people of a certain mindset are more likely to have a heart attack and also more likely to go to Waffle House. So Waffle House doesn't cause heart attacks. They're just both symptoms or outcomes of a similar behavior. So, obviously here what we're getting at is choice of food that you eat, healthy food. Are you somebody who's aware that Waffle House is not a good diet or element to have in your diet, or are you? And if you are, Waffle House is obviously not going to have a lot of success with business in that area, and they won't exist. And you will probably, and that same type of person would be pursuing more natural foods where there would be more markets. I really like this one because it grabs your attention, and then you could use it to talk about a lot of elements here and what's going on. And this is simply showing they took a bicycle and they pushed it, and then they tracked its path till it fell over. So on the left here, they took the bicycle, they pushed it 800 times. And for each run, you could see by the density, the likelihood of the path they would choose. So they all obviously stayed straight for a short period of time. And then, we know what we know about bicycles. We know the speed drops off. So one thing here, you could say almost left to right, if they were pushing it the same, you could almost put on the x-axis speed. So it's both distance and speed. We can see there's a much higher density for them to lose their going straight and balance early on, and this then occurs, it decreases as you go further down. But what's also interesting is there's kind of a wave here. If you look at the upper profile, that means that there's specific points where it's more likely for it to lose balance. So in other words, if it doesn't lose balance in that initial part, there's almost this guarantee that it's going to stay stable for a short period of time, and then there's another opportunity for it to lose control, which is a very consistent branch there. And then it kind of does it again, and then there's this element where it, towards the end there, where again it becomes, if it's stable in that area, it's very likely to stay stable there, and then it lose control. And then there's really only a very few stragglers that randomly go all the way out to the end. So it's kind of neat. From this actually isn't even a graphic. It basically is a literal transition of it. If you had put paint on the tires, what would be physically plotted by the action itself. So I thought that was a really neat way to communicate that. This one's kind of neat. So this is tech giants, and what they acquire is so Apple, Amazon, Google, Yahoo, Facebook, what types of other companies they acquire, and showing the size of what they've acquired, and what year. And what's really cool too is that it has the links in it to take you to further details for the ones that are of interest. So this isn't using complex, like the ones with the wind. Or the distance to Mars, complex code. This is very simple. This is simply hyperlinks, right? But it's creating the opportunity for deep dives of information beyond the information you have here, with something that you can have in a Word doc, right? Or a PowerPoint or anything. You can nowadays, you can even in an email, you can put in a hyperlink. So it's using the hyperlink as opportunities for greater depth and complexity of information. So now I'm going to show you what is my favorite one, and as those who know me from video conferences know, I actually have a framed picture of this behind me in my office. And this is Charles Menard's 1869 diagram of Napoleon's Russian invasion campaign of 1812. And I call it the beautiful documentation of an epic disaster. And the reason why I love this one so much is obviously not because it's colorful, but because it can support infinite discussion, in my opinion, about all the elements that went on with this invasion. And so we'll jump into it a little bit, and I'm going to, we'll go into some areas of detail. But even without explanation, I remember the first time I saw it. It's in French. I remember being able to very quickly figure out a lot of elements here. I mean, quite clearly, you have on the left where they started, Kono, and where it ended on the right-hand side, Moscow. I'm like, okay, we're looking at clearly geographic distance here, left to right. Then I noticed that there were the two colors and changing thickness of the lines. And so the tan was, you started to figure out, okay, that's going out to Moscow, and then the black is coming back. And with the numbers on the sides of the lines, you can tell, okay, I think that's the population of the soldiers going out and back. And you then quickly realize, like, wow, this was a disaster. 422,000 soldiers left and 10,000 came back. What happened? What's going on here? So other information that we see here is we see a few geographic things. We see there's a few rivers that are marked out, those lines. And you would, if you were familiar with the area, you'd probably recognize the name to know that those squiggly lines are rivers. And then at the bottom is temperature. Air temperature. You see these temperatures, you're like, okay, clearly temperature was a big effect here. This is part of the story they're trying to tell. So if we zoom in a little bit, there's a couple interesting things here. So one, obviously, the group broke off, 60,000 men broke off at one point, or, soldiers. And then at some point did a return and came back and joined the return. So that's kind of interesting. The other thing is, what are these steps? You see that middle arrow pointing to these steps. Why are they these sudden reduction in, in the population? And then we also see that, for those temperatures, I think we can figure out those are temperatures by date, because not only is the path along the x-axis distance, it's obviously time. So we're seeing the effectively weather reports from specific periods in time. So here's some of the questions it raises to me. We had those steps. Those steps were battles. That, of course, is the one way you would lose a lot of people quickly in a single location. So that's when the Russians were pushing back hard on the French, and there were battles there. And clearly the Russians didn't succeed in stopping them, because the battles continue, but there are losses on the French side. But then there's something interesting there in the middle. What happened to the steppes? Why are there no more population reduction in these sudden steppes? It just becomes this linear reduction then, from pretty much about 175,000 to getting closer to Moscow, 127,000 before the next big step. Well, as this is great for talking about now with what people know detail about it, and why temperature is plotted on here also. Because what the Russians decided is they kept getting pushed back. They figured out that they weren't strong enough to fight the French, but they did know what was. They had earned the right to live in Russia, and nobody else had. And that's because Russia is brutal. The winters are brutal. And the French had thought the fight would be so quick that it wouldn't go into winter. But the Russians had realized that they were going to go into winter, and they decided to just let winter kill off Napoleon's army. And that's the moment there where the step stop, you realize that occurred. So the Russians began to just retreat. And as they retreated and they went through towns in Russia, they emptied, they had the populations evacuate, and they burned houses, and they took all the food away and everything and resources, letting the French just continue to go deeper and deeper into what really was a barren, freezing wasteland. And they even went so far, if you look at the Moscow part, there's no loss of troops. And what the Russians had done is they evacuated Moscow as well and took everything from there, clothing, food, everything, because they knew that the winter that would be what would kill them. And so what happened was the strategy worked. As Napoleon got to Moscow, and he had, instead of his 422,000 troops that he started with, he had 100,000. And they were starving, and they were freezing, and they were dying from disease and hunger. So he just got there, and they just realized, okay, we got into Moscow. That was our goal. Now what? And they just left. That was it. They had to leave. But winter wasn't done with them yet, obviously, because they leave after they get there, and it shows that they left with 100,000 troops, same as they went in with, which means they basically got there and left in the same day, just about, we can assume. And then as they came back, the temperature dropped and dropped. And it's showing the alignment now of the temperatures with the notches that we're seeing, showing that it was the drops in temperatures that people were dying in large amounts in probably single evenings. And one of the other really interesting ones is that bottom left arrow I have there, the red one, which is showing I think it's the Berzina River. And you can see that they went from 50,000 down to about 28,000 right at that river. That river destroyed half of the army and them just trying to cross it. It must have froze them to death. The temperature it's showing there was around negative 20 degrees during that time period. So that river alone, cut them in half. And this is even after that group that was more refreshed that stayed back and joined them again, had come in there. They basically joined back and got wiped out. And then, of course, you see the projection going back where it gets to negative 30 degrees. And then they get back home with 10,000 guys. So there's so much more in here as well, but you can see how I was able to talk for an extended period of time for what effectively is a very simple graphic. So that's what I wanted to share with you about information graphics. I hope it was interesting and it inspires you to look into it and begin to add a little bit more complexity to the way you share your data. Thank you.